Good morning. Aperture is often misunderstood. There are very good reasons why professionals aren't afraid to shoot at FA+, but many amateurs are stuck shooting wide open, chasing bokeh and sharpness. And I've been there for many years back then. So let's break aperture down together. What it is, how it affects your photo sharpness, when to use high apertures like a Nat Geo photographer, and when to use small apertures. By the end of this video, you will know how to use aperture like a pro, no matter what gear you have. And for on-the-field help, make sure you grab my free camera cheat sheet below in the description. And thank you, PPA, for sponsoring part of this video. Now, let's get into it. I still remember trying to shoot everything wide open, only to end up with unsharp images, blurry, soft, and not understanding what I was doing, honestly. So let's break things together. First, what is aperture? It corresponds to that little number that's on your lens, okay? What does that mean? It simply means how wide your lens is going to open. There's a diaphragm inside every lens, but you may or may not be able to see it depending if it's like electronically controlled. But just understand that it's gonna open more or less. And the wider it opens, that means the smaller your aperture, and the narrower it gets, that means the higher your aperture. With that, what happens? Well, you get more light into your lens and thus into your camera sensor with a wide aperture, and with a narrow aperture, you're gonna have less light. And on top of that, it affects your depth of field in the image. It simply will define if you have just the front of the bush that is sharp where you focused, or if you will have a lot more in focus in that image, meaning you will be able to see more in that image. It won't be as blurry. Now, a big mistake is to always chase more blur, more blur, more blur. And that's not always a great thing. We'll get to that in a second. Now, there are also a few secrets you need to know here about depth of field, because not only the aperture affects that depth of field you'll have in an image in that cool background blur and foreground. Don't forget that one's very important creatively. For example, if you're trying to shoot through people or a fence, it's great to blur that foreground also. Here's the secret. The depth of field is also affected by your distance to your subject and the focal length you're using. Understand that the wider your lens, the more depth of field you will have in your image at the same aperture. And the narrower your lens, the longer your lens, so let's say 100 millimeter, the more you're going to have that background blur. So even at f4, even at f5.6, you will have that background blur, and that's a great hack to get good looking images no matter what kind of gear you're using. Sometimes it just requires you shooting with a longer lens or getting closer, like you can see on this example. Getting closer is really a good hack that you can see even in this video. You see, my hand is in focus, and now everything is in focus here, but you can also see what's in the background. But if I bring my hand here, you see how it's affected? Last but not least, very important, your sharpness is also affected by your aperture. Each lens has a sweet spot where it is the sharpest and you get the richest, if you want, images in terms of details and colors. And it usually is around f6 to f9 depending on the lenses, but it is in that range. If you've always struggled to get really sharp photos and everything looks soft and dull at f1.8, f2.8, maybe try to shoot at f4, 5, 6, and see how it comes out. Before we go any further, do you shoot wide open or do you shoot very close down? Let me know in the description below. Comment 1 for wide open and comment 2 for very tight apertures. Now, when to use that wide aperture and when to use that narrow aperture. Let's get into it. You want to shoot with a wide aperture to get bokeh, creamy background blur to isolate your subject very simply, as you can see on those examples. It also helps in low light because you have more light coming into your camera, so your camera has to work less hard, meaning your sensor with the ISO and the shutter speed, you can control things more and shoot maybe with a higher shutter speed, or you don't have to bump as much your ISO. I have a whole video on the basics around that, the exposure triangle and everything that is linked in the description. You can go and watch that if that is still confusing for you. And it can make a space that is not necessarily very pretty, very beautiful, because you're blurring things out. And with blurring things out, well, you don't see as many details. It's way less distracting, and that is why a lot of people love it. It's really something that makes everything look a little more beautiful. But there are pitfalls. What is the pitfall? Well, your focus can be missed extremely easily. Why? Because if your depth of field is literally as thin as a piece of paper, that means that any movement when you're taking your photo will make you miss the focus. So, for example, you may end up focusing on the nose instead of the eyes, or even sometimes the eyebrows or the ears instead of the eyes. Just know that it can be extremely tricky, and when you're doing portrait, it's something you really want to be paying attention to. Actually, that used to be a big mistake of mine when I was beginning. I was shooting wide open and I missed very often my focus. So maybe shooting a little bit narrower with an aperture a little higher may help you next time to get sharper photos more in focus. So next, when do we use tight apertures? When do you use that narrow? And why do a lot of my great photographer friends use it much more than amateurs I know? Now, before we reveal the secret of shooting with tight apertures, do you have insurance on your gear? Is your gear secured? What happens if someone steals your camera? What happens if it breaks? Do you have an insurance? If you don't, check out PPA. PPA stands for Professional Photographers of America, and it's in the company that provides equipment coverage that protects your gear, whether it's stolen, damaged, or lost. And it goes beyond just replacing your camera. They also provide legal support, copyright protection, education, and even help with data recovery if your memory cards are compromised. Through PPA, you can get up to $15,000 of gear insurance, $50 flat deductible for equipment repairs, and $350 deductible for full replacements of equipment lost. Make sure if you have a drone that you add the drone policy, get $25 off your first year with PPA, and get on the field with peace of mind. So, tight apertures, what is the secret here? Well, the secret is, first, you get very sharp images around f8, for example. And on top of that, you get a lot of context in your images, which can backfire on you, but it can also be a blessing because you add context, you're able to tell a stronger story that is richer in details, that tells you, for example, that person is doing something, but you can tell what's happening in the background also, which informs your photo. Maybe there are different people in the same frame that are important to your story, and if you were shooting it wide open, they would completely disappear or be very hard to make sense of. And that is exactly why Nat Geo photographers use those narrow apertures, because they're storytellers and they're trying to bring the story first. On top of that, it forces you to work really hard. Why? Because you can't rely on that bokeh to isolate your subject. So you want to be working on your composition like really a master. How? By bringing your subject on a background that will make it pop, by finding angles that will make your subject pop, and really working all the tools that you have except that bokeh in order to bring your story to life and make your subject very easy to understand and read. On top of that, that allows you also, when you're shooting with a narrow aperture, to slow down your shutter speed in daytime and thus have some creative blur and motion in your photos that a lot of photographers actually use for storytelling, for stronger photos. So next time you're on the field, don't shy away from shooting at f8. I actually encourage you, if you want a creative exercise, to only shoot at f8 for a week and see where that leads you. Remember to grab the free photography cheat sheet in the description below, and make sure you nail your autofocus by watching this video and watch this one if you want to go a little deeper into other important camera settings to get great photos. Now, with that being said, get out there, go shoot, try something different, try something new. Ciao.